Rain pattered steadily against the windshield of the old Ford pickup Derek Langston had rented as he quietly pulled into the parking lot of Sunrise Diner 28. The autumn chill cast a foggy gray veil over the dreary morning. The faded truck, wrinkled flannel shirt, worn-out jeans, and a trucker hat pulled low over his face. Everything had been chosen carefully to fit the role he was about to play. Today, Derek wasn't the CEO of a multi-million-dollar restaurant chain. Today, he was someone entirely different. Walt Simmons, a retired long-haul trucker passing through town to visit his daughter. He glanced at his watch, 7:30 a.m., the peak of the breakfast rush. Perfect timing to see firsthand how this operation functioned, beyond the polished numbers and glowing reports. On paper, the restaurant was profitable, and Stan, the regional manager, always sang its praises. But Derek wasn't easily convinced by pretty spreadsheets. He had been in this business long enough to sense when something didn't add up. Employee turnover here was 3 times higher than other locations, and online reviews shared a common thread. An odd atmosphere, staff that didn't seem happy. The most recent internal surveys showed employee satisfaction at an all-time low. Stan had brushed it off, calling it growing pains common during expansion. Doug's got it under control, he had insisted. Doug Henderson, the very manager Derek had personally promoted 3 years ago after Doug delivered impressive results at a smaller branch. Now Doug was running the company's second highest grossing location, but something felt off, and Derek knew he couldn't rely on reports alone anymore. He needed to see the truth for himself. The neon diner sign buzzed faintly as the rain splashed against its weathered frame, its flickering light reflecting the doubts swirling in Derek's mind. He exhaled deeply, tugged his cap lower, and told himself, time to step into character. As he opened the door, a bell chimed overhead, and the familiar scent of coffee, bacon, and freshly griddled pancakes washed over him. Nostalgic reminders of honest American mornings, fueled by hard work and early hours. Inside, the warmth stood in sharp contrast to the biting chill outside. Derek stepped in, eyes scanning the space like a casual traveler. But in truth, he was taking mental notes of everything. The floor was clean enough, but dust had gathered in the corners. The Employee of the Month board still displayed August's winner, even though it was now mid-October. Minor details, yes, but to someone who had built this business from the ground up, they spoke volumes about what was slipping through the cracks. "Just one today?" a young woman asked, approaching him with a forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her name tag read Amber, but she was missing the standard Sunrise pin. Derek nodded, speaking in a gravelly southern drawl. "Yes, ma'am, just passing through." Amber led him to a small table near the kitchen entrance, a perfect vantage point for observation. She dropped a laminated menu onto the table without a word and walked off. No greeting, no hospitality script, no eye contact. Strike one. From his seat, Derek had a clear view of the main service floor and part of the kitchen. The restaurant was busy but not chaotic. 3 servers moved through the dining room, but their paces were starkly different. 2 young men in pristine uniforms stood near the coffee station, casually chatting while tending to only 2 tables each. The third, a petite woman with sharp eyes, darted efficiently between guests. Her name tag read Cassie, and she was single-handedly managing nearly twice as many tables as the others combined. Her uniform was clean but faded, the embroidered Sunrise logo on her chest fraying at the edges. Cassie wasn't flashy, but there was something captivating about her presence. Her quiet focus, her genuine professionalism. The way her tired eyes still tried to make others feel seen. When she approached Derek's table, slightly breathless but still composed, he immediately recognized something familiar in her. Not just the demeanor of a hard-working employee, but the deeper weight of someone holding on to pride, or perhaps a fragile strand of hope in an unfair system. "Good morning. Sorry to keep you waiting. Would you like some coffee to start?" Cassie asked. her voice gentle as she poured coffee with hands that trembled ever so slightly, yet didn't spill a drop. "Black as midnight, please," Derek replied, staying in character. He studied her closely. Beneath her carefully applied makeup, dark circles told the story of sleepless nights, or worse, the weight of relentless worry. Cassie continued, "Today's special is the trucker's delight. 3 eggs any style, bacon, sausage, hash browns, and buttermilk pancakes." She smiled faintly, then added with a playful wink, "Should keep you going for another 300 miles. Derek chuckled softly, but something heavier stirred inside him. His early suspicion was hardening into a deeper concern. Something was wrong here, and this girl, Cassie, just might be the key to uncovering it. Her voice faltered for a moment when she mentioned freedom, a small hitch that didn't go unnoticed by Derek. That word clearly struck something inside her. As she turned and walked back toward the kitchen, Derek couldn't stop watching her. There was something admirable and heartbreaking in the way she moved, like someone who had learned to carry more than her share of burdens with quiet strength. His eyes drifted to the 2 male servers, still lounging by the coffee machine. They smirked as Cassie passed, their looks more mocking than concerned. When a young family walked in, the hostess didn't hesitate to seat them in Cassie's section, despite there being open tables in the others. Once again, the load was shifted to her, and no one seemed to think twice about it. Through the kitchen window, Derek spotted a lean man in a tucked-in shirt, wearing a name tag that read Doug Henderson, manager. Compared to his corporate headshot, Doug now looked colder, sharper. He leaned in and whispered something to one of the male servers, a young man with similar facial features. Then both burst into laughter, glancing pointedly at Cassie. A chill ran down Derek's spine. This wasn't just disorganization. It was favoritism, intentional, calculated, and he was about to uncover just how deep it went. When Cassie returned with a breakfast plate meticulously arranged to sunrise standards, Derek decided it was time to start probing. "Busy morning, huh?" he said casually, like any other customer making small talk. "You seem to be doing the work of all 3 servers." Cassie's smile faded slightly, her eyes flicking quickly around the room as if afraid someone might overhear. "That's just how the ships are scheduled," she answered cautiously. "At least the tips must be worth it, right?" Derek said, taking a bite of perfectly crisped bacon. Cassie hesitated for just a second, but that pause was all Derek needed to know there was more beneath the surface. She tightened her grip on the coffee pot, her knuckles whitening slightly. "Actually," she said in a hushed voice, barely audible over the clatter of the diner, "morning shifts are the worst for tips, especially when they're supposed to be shared, but not everyone actually shares." Before he could ask more, she was called away to another table. Derek sat there, watching her move. Small, worn down in her faded uniform, but resilient. The anger he felt didn't come from his role as CEO. It came from the gut of someone who had spent a lifetime building a system he believed was fair. He had come here to investigate operational efficiency, but what he was seeing now pointed to something deeper, possibly even illegal. He sipped his lukewarm coffee, eyes locked on the rhythm of the restaurant. The pieces were beginning to align. Cassie was juggling 12 tables while Ryan and Jason, names he read off their badges, each handled just 4. And every time one of Cassie's tables paid, usually by card, one of the guys would happen to step in and process the payment. The trick was subtle enough to look coincidental, but too consistent to be chance. It was a clean way to skim tips without touching anyone's wallet. Undetectable to most, except the ones directly affected. As the breakfast crowd began to thin, Derek raised his hand slightly. Cassie approached quickly, her coffee pot nearly empty. "Can I get you anything else, sir?" she asked, polite as always, though the fatigue in her voice was harder to hide now. "Just had a quick question," he said, then added gently, "and maybe a few minutes of your time, if you're not too busy." Cassie hesitated, worry flickering in her eyes. I can bring your check, but I'm not sure I can talk much. Management's pretty strict. Derek gave a reassuring smile, lowering his voice. I just wanted to ask a bit about the area. My daughter's thinking of moving here. The white lie worked instantly. Cassie's shoulders relaxed slightly and she nodded. I'll be right back with your check. When she returned, Derek noticed she carried a fresh order pad and tucked it into her apron pocket. A smart little move to justify lingering at his table in case anyone asked. "Oh, your daughter's thinking of moving here?" she asked, laying down the check. Derek nodded slowly, deliberately rifling through his wallet. "She's been offered a job? I'm just checking if this is a place where people are treated right." He looked her in the eye. He didn't need to say more. Cassie's well-rehearsed smile wavered. She glanced around the restaurant, then leaned in just a bit, voice barely a whisper. "This place used to be different. Things started to change after Doug took over." "How long have you worked here?" Derek asked gently, slipping a $20.00 bill onto the check. 3 years. I started back in high school and kept working through community college." A flicker of pride broke through her tired expression. "Just one more semester left for my accounting degree." "Impressive. Accounting, huh?" Derek said with a smile. "I believe you'll be great at it." Cassie let out a soft, restrained sigh. "If I can still afford to finish." Her voice dropped further, almost swallowed by the noise of the diner. "Every month gets harder," she admitted, as if finally allowing herself to say the truth she'd been denying. Derek recognized the moment her guard cracked, and he knew this was the opening. He nodded quietly, not as an authority figure, but as someone who understood. "Tips not making up the difference? Looked like you were covering nearly the whole floor this morning." Something in Cassie cracked, not loudly, but like a dam leaking under too much pressure. She pulled out her order pad and pretended to write, but her hand didn't move. She wasn't writing. She was deciding whether or not to trust him. "We're supposed to pool digital tips through the POS system. That's the rule," she whispered, each word feeling like an act of rebellion. "But Doug, he changed it. He built this shadow system. Only certain people get assigned to process digital tips. The rest of us, we're told that cash tips will be evened out at the end of the day." She pressed her pen hard into the page, nearly tearing it. "But they never are." Derek clenched his fist beneath the table. The anger wasn't just professional. It was deeply personal. He had built this company on fairness and integrity. Now that very foundation was being twisted into a tool for exploitation. "How much have you lost?" he asked, voice calm but firm. Cassie's hands trembled. "Over 600 this month," she said softly. "I track everything, every shift, every bill. I know exactly how much the POS says came in and how much I actually received." "Why haven't you reported it?" Derek asked. Cassie gave a bitter, almost breathless laugh. It wasn't humor. It was exhaustion given a voice. "To who?" she murmured. "Doug's nephew Ryan always gets the best shifts, always gets the POS access. Even if I did say something, no one would believe me." He cast a quick glance toward the register. Ryan was laughing and chatting with the hostess. "The regional manager only listens to Doug. And the company, they don't care about people like me." Derek swallowed hard. If only she knew who was really sitting across from her. But he stayed in character. "Is anyone else affected?" he asked, masking the rage building inside him. Cassie gave a faint nod. "Anyone not in Doug's inner circle. The rest of us survive on whatever scraps they leave behind." The kitchen door swung open. Cassie immediately straightened, her expression shifting in an instant, as if the conversation had never happened. "I've got to go. Hope your daughter finds a better place to work than this." Derek watched her hurry away, his chest tightening. He left a $20 bill on the table, fully aware Cassie might never see it. But he hid another, folded neatly and slipped under his empty coffee cup, where only she would find it. As he walked out of the diner, he passed Ryan, still grinning at the hostess. "Great morning shift," Ryan said with smug pride. Digital tips are on fire today. Outside, the rain had stopped, but inside Derek, a storm was gathering. He climbed into the truck, pulled out his phone and dialed a number he rarely used. His direct line to Mara Jenkins, head of internal investigations at Sunrise. "Mara, it's Derek. I need you to drop everything and meet me in an hour. Immediately." He started the engine and looked into the rearview mirror. Doug had just stepped out of the kitchen, clapping Ryan hard on the back, clearly a gesture of praise. Derek narrowed his eyes. "We've got a serious situation at Sunrise, number 28. I need full access to POS data, surveillance footage, and employee complaint records for the past 6 months. And Mara, keep it completely under wraps. No one can know I was here." As the truck pulled away, he glanced one last time through the diner's window. Cassie had returned to clear the table. Her eyes widened slightly as she discovered the second hidden 20. The exhaustion in her gaze softened, replaced by the faintest flicker of hope. It was a small win, but for Derek, it was the spark of something far greater. He had come here for breakfast. He was staying for justice. 1 hour later, the Lake City conference room had been converted into an impromptu command center. A massive screen displayed spreadsheets and months' worth of transaction data. Mara and her 2 associates were focused, eyes fixed on the numbers. Derek was no longer Walt Simmons. He had changed back into slacks and a button-down shirt, though he kept the gray beard, just in case he needed to return undercover. "Show me again," Derek said, stepping behind Mara's chair. On her screen were payroll records going back 6 months. Mara pointed to one column in the employee classification system. Ellie buried it pretty well. Doug created a new, unauthorized classification in the system, a sort of auxiliary server role. It's not listed in any of our corporate manuals. Derek leaned in closer, eyes scanning the data. "And Cassie, she's listed under that?" "Heard and 7 others," Mara confirmed, her voice low, bracing him for what was coming next. "When they're marked as auxiliary, the system doesn't assign them digital tips. Instead, all tips are redirected to whoever's listed as the main POS operator for that shift." Derek narrowed his eyes, his jaw tightening. "Let me guess, Ryan Henderson?" Mara opened a second spreadsheet, the numbers appearing cold and damning. "Correct. In 67% of digital POS shifts, Ryan was assigned as the default POS handler. The other 3 servers rotating through are also part of Doug's inner circle." The second investigator, Luis, turned his laptop toward Derek. "We pulled the surveillance footage you requested. You should see this." The video had no sound, but it didn't need any. It showed the end of a busy lunch shift. Staff gathered around Doug, who was holding a metal cash box. He counted bills, handing specific amounts to certain staff, Ryan among them, while others, including a young woman believed to be Cassie, received far less. Cassie made a visible gesture toward the box, her expression clearly questioning the discrepancy. Doug waved her off dismissively, saying something that made Ryan burst into mocking laughter. "Any way to get audio?" Derek asked, hopeful. Luis shook his head. "No, but we don't need it. Just look at the numbers." He switched to a transaction analysis from that same day. Customer credit card tips for the morning and lunch shifts totaled $847, but payroll records showed only $412 were distributed. Of that, Ryan alone received $178. "So where's the other $435? Derek asked, no longer hiding the fury in his voice. Mara pulled up a bank record. "Here's the kicker," she said, pointing to a series of small deposits made weekly. They were going into an account under the name Douglas Henderson LLC, a private business entity Doug had registered just 3 months after taking over this location. Derek felt something twist inside his chest. This wasn't favoritism anymore. This was embezzlement. Plain and simple. "What about employee complaints?" Derek asked, searching for one last lifeline in the murky waters. This time, the third investigator, Tanya, who had remained silent until now, handed him a thin folder. This is where it gets strange. Over the past 6 months, there have only been 3 formal complaints, all of them marked resolved by regional management. Stan wouldn't overlook something like this, Derek muttered as he quickly flipped through the pages, ambled. Never saw them, Tanya replied, pointing to the signature section. They were all intercepted at the assistant manager level, signed off by Ryan Henderson. Derek lowered the folder, his expression twisted with disgust. The nephew. Tanya wasn't finished. There's more. We pulled the exit interview records. Most cite personal reasons or schedule conflicts. But this morning, I called 6 former employees. She opened a notebook with hastily written notes. 5 of them told me the same thing. Derek didn't need her to finish. He already knew. They all shared the same story, Tanya continued, her voice as still and cold as a breeze down a hospital hallway. As soon as they questioned the tip distribution, they were assigned the worst shifts. Early mornings, split shifts, or sections with the lowest foot traffic. No one lasted long, and Cassie can't afford to quit, Mara added. She has no choice. Her student loan repayment starts next month. Even with the stolen tips, she's one of the few with open availability. It's just barely enough to scrape by. Derek stood frozen before the data board, but his mind was spinning. The scattered fragments had now come together into a full picture of systemic rot. All the customer complaints about staff attitudes, the strange employee behavior, the sky-high turnover, those were just symptoms. Now he could finally see the disease, not neglect but deliberate exploitation. Preliminary estimate, Louise chimed in. Over $18,000 in misappropriated tips last quarter alone. And that's just what we can track through digital logs. Mara took a deep breath. We've got enough to fire everyone involved immediately. The question is, how do you want to handle it? Derek walked to the window, eyes following the rain as it streamed down the glass, like the memories of his own early days bussing tables, scrubbing floors, learning to respect every dollar in tips. The easy way, he said, voice calm and steely, is to let HR take over. Quiet, fast, clean. Fire them and move on like nothing happened. He turned back to face the team, locking eyes with each of them. But that's not justice, not for Cassie, not for everyone who's been treated unfairly. He stepped forward, his voice firm. I have another way. Over the next 30 minutes, Derek laid out a plan, one unlike anything Sunrise had ever done before. Every step was documented, calculated, and carefully thought through. Mara's face darkened at first, but then softened as she nodded with understanding. This isn't standard procedure, she said, but it sends a clear message, not just to Doug and Ryan, but to every manager in our network. And to every Cassie out there, Derek added, fire rising in his chest. The ones who stayed quiet out of fear, poverty, or the belief that no one would ever listen. When do we move? Louise asked, already ready to act. Derek checked his watch, a slight smile forming on his lips. Friday morning, right in the middle of breakfast service. I want everyone to see what happens when someone steals from their team. As the team dispersed to begin preparations, Derek returned to the stack of evidence. His eyes landed on a single photo. Cassie, standing alone, questioning a tip box she knew wouldn't protect her. He whispered, almost to her, almost to himself, just a few more days. Then the world will see who really runs this place. Thursday morning arrived with a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. It came from the tension of knowing that the truth was about to be exposed. Derek stood before the hotel mirror, adjusting every detail of his disguise with methodical care. The beard remained, so did the graying hair. But today, Walt wore a newer flannel shirt and freshly pressed jeans, like a returning customer with a bit more money to spend. Every detail was deliberate, his expression, his voice, even the way he placed the prepaid loyalty card into his wallet. Mara approached from the window, her outfit casual but intentional. Jeans, a light cardigan, and black-rimmed glasses. The perfect image of a middle-aged daughter having breakfast with her father. "You sure about this?" she asked, serious eyes meeting his. "Absolutely," Derek replied, slipping the card into his wallet. "We need undeniable proof, something that shows Doug and Ryan aren't just sloppy. They're actively committing fraud. We already have enough to fire them." Mara reminded him. "This isn't just about firing two people," Derek said, voice like granite. "This is about showing everyone what happened was real. It was intentional, and it's being dealt with at the highest level." An hour later, the familiar chime rang once again as the door to Sunrise Diner 28 opened. Derek and Mara stepped inside. The early morning mist hadn't fully cleared, but the tension in the air was already thick. It was time for the final mask to come off. On this Friday morning, a new hostess, with a stiff, robotic demeanor, led Derek and Mara to a booth in the far corner of the diner. "Your server will be right with you," she said, before quickly walking away without so much as a glance back. Derek glanced around the restaurant. The hustle and bustle felt familiar, reminiscent of the mornings he once lived through in the early days of his career. But today it all felt heavier. Cassie was still the only one moving, like she carried the entire shift on her shoulders. She floated from table to table with her usual coffee pot in hand. Meanwhile, Ryan was casually chatting with customers in his section, flashing a fake smile and looking utterly unbothered. Doug leaned against the wall near the register, arms crossed, eyes sharp, missing nothing. "That's Doug," Derek whispered to Mara. "And the server by the window is Ryan." Mara nodded, quietly pulling out her phone. To anyone watching, she looked like she was checking messages. In reality, she had just activated the secure recording app developed by the company's legal team. Every word spoken from now on would be preserved as hard evidence. "What?" Cassie's voice lit up, surprised. Her face brightened for a brief moment, a rare spark of joy in the middle of a long day. "You're back?" "Couldn't resist the pancakes," Derek replied warmly. "This is my daughter, Mara. I kept telling her about this place, so I thought she should see it for herself." "Pleasure to meet you," Cassie said, then hesitated. She cast a quick glance toward Doug, who was watching them closely with a piercing stare. "Normally I'd take care of your table," she added, voice low. "But today, Ryan will be your server. Doug wants to rotate returning customers." Derek caught the resignation in her tone. She sounded like someone far too used to having no say in anything. "Any particular reason?" he asked, still playing the casual customer. Cassie offered a strained smile. "Just policy, I guess." Then she quickly added, "Can I get you some coffee while you wait for him?" "Be lovely, thank you," Mara said warmly. As Cassie walked away, Derek noticed Doug speaking quietly to Ryan. Ryan's eyes flicked toward their table, followed by a subtle hand gesture and a quick nod. The trap was being set, exactly according to plan. "Good morning." Ryan appeared moments later, all polished charm. "I'm Ryan. I'll be taking care of you two today. Cassie mentioned you were returning guests. Figured it was time to mix things up a bit." "Oh?" Derek played along, curious. "I heard something about a new loyalty program. I signed up for a card online." Ryan's eyes lit up. "Smart move. That card gets you 5% off your bill, and it's prepaid. Makes checkout way quicker and easier." The conversation flowed predictably, like any scripted customer interaction. Derek ordered the grand slam. Eggs, bacon, pancakes, the full spread. Mara kept it simple with eggs and toast. As they ate, Derek watched the performance unfold. Cassie continued to handle nearly twice the number of tables as the others. Yet, just as he had observed before, she never processed a single payment. Every digital transaction went through Ryan. When the meal ended, Derek slowly pulled out his wallet. "I'd like to pay with this card," he said, holding up the loyalty card. "And I'd like to add a $50 0 cents tip." Ryan's eyebrows rose slightly. "Wow, that's generous. Good service deserves recognition." Derek smiled, locking eyes with him. "I assume the tip is shared among everyone equally." A flicker of discomfort crossed Ryan's face before he slipped back into his customer service mask. "Of course, we always divide tips at the end of the shift." "Glad to hear it," Derek said, handing over the card. Mara caught her father's glance and gave him a slight nod. Phase 1, complete. 1 hour later, back at the Lakeside office, the entire investigation team was gathered around a large screen showing live transaction data. Luis filtered the latest logs quickly. "Here it is," he said, pointing at the newest entry. $50 tip, recorded and immediately routed to employee ID, RH-274. "Ryan Henderson," Mara read aloud, eyes locked on the screen. "Got him," Louise confirmed, marking the transaction path. There was no longer any doubt. The evidence wasn't just clear, it exposed a long-running, sophisticated abuse of the system. The auto-tip allocation had done exactly what it was programmed to do. Sent the entire $50 0 cents tip to the employee listed as the primary POS handler. Cassie, once again, received nothing. Her employee ID appeared beside the entry, cold and indifferent. Tip allocation equals $0 0 cents. In another conference room at the hotel, Mara was on a video call with 3 former employees. Their stories were disturbingly consistent, as if they had all lived the same script. The loyalty card program, Doug's brainchild, had been introduced 6 months ago under the guise of modernizing the payment system. But in truth, it was nothing more than a trap, funneling digital tips into the pockets of a carefully selected few. I'd Harrison Davis or train a Harrison Ford when he was manhunting on sight unseen on true crime. Hall told us it was for accounting convenience, one former employee recalled, his eyes filled with bitterness. But strangely, only certain people were ever allowed to handle those cards. As the investigation team finalized the case files, Derek stood silently by the window, watching a small pond on the hotel grounds. A family of ducks swam in a neat line, slow, steady, and orderly. A rare moment of peace before the storm that was about to break. Tomorrow, everything would change. A new chapter would begin at Sunrise Diner, No. 28. Some would leave in shame. Others might, for the first time, experience what justice felt like. "Send the complete files to legal," Derek instructed the team. "I want everything ready by tomorrow morning." He turned back, his face etched like granite. It's time to serve breakfast to the real thieves. Friday morning arrived with a rare ray of sunshine after a week of gray skies. Sunlight streamed through the windows, but inside Derek, a storm was brewing. At exactly 8:45 a.m., 3 sleek black SUVs pulled into the parking lot of Sunrise Diner. Drivers exited in sync, opening doors for each passenger in what looked more like a military operation than a breakfast run. Inside, customers paused mid-bite. All eyes turned toward the windows as a group of individuals in black suits, carrying tablets and case folders, walked briskly into the restaurant. Essie was pouring coffee at a table near the aisle when she heard the commotion. She turned her head. At first she thought they were health inspectors, but they never arrived in convoys. Then, a more terrifying thought crossed her mind. Immigration? But no, everyone at Sunrise had legal documentation. Still, a tightening sense of dread gripped her chest. She didn't have time to make sense of it before, crash! The coffee pot slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor, because standing there was Walt, but not the Walt she knew. Gone was the faded trucker hat and flannel shirt. Gone was the soft shuffle of a kindly retired father. In his place stood a tall, commanding man in a charcoal gray suit, His eyes gleamed like forged steel. His presence was no longer warm. It was judgment made flesh. Doug stepped out from the office, mid-sentence, then froze. The color drained from his face as he recognized the man now standing in the center of his restaurant, Derek Langston, the CEO and founder of Sunrise Restaurant Group. Mr. Langston, we had no idea. Doug stammered. Clearly, Derek replied, his voice calm but razor-sharp. His team quickly spread out, positioning themselves near the entrances, the register, and the kitchen. They carried no weapons, yet the tension in the air was as heavy as lead. Diners sat frozen, forks and spoons suspended in mid-air, watching a scene unfold as if they'd been cast in a movie they hadn't auditioned for. Derek walked slowly through the dining area, eyes scanning every employee, every customer. He stopped in the middle of the room, turned and stood tall, like a general preparing to deliver a verdict. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice cutting through the silence. "I apologize for the interruption. My name is Derek Langston. I'm the CEO of Sunrise Restaurant Group. We're conducting an emergency audit that could not be delayed. As a token of our appreciation for your patience, your meals today are on the house." He nodded. One of his team members began handing out complimentary meal vouchers to each table. Doug stood frozen. Ryan, just a few steps away, ducked behind the coffee station, trying to hide his face. Cassie remained rooted in place, her eyes locked on the man she had once thought was just a kind old trucker. Just days ago, she'd believed he was nothing more than a retired man passing through. Now he was the only one who had seen her truth and done something about it, when the entire system had turned its back on her. Doug stepped forward, forcing a smile that couldn't mask the panic in his eyes. "Mr. Langston, what a surprise. Had I known, I would've..." "Would've what, Doug?" Derek cut him off, his tone slicing through the room. "Changed the staff's schedule? Temporarily adjusted the tip-sharing system? Maybe deleted a few suspicious transactions?" Doug's face turned pale, as if he'd been slapped with the truth. Ryan, still behind the coffee bar, instinctively took a step toward the back exit. "I wouldn't," Mara said flatly, already blocking the door. "Security's been instructed not to let anyone leave without clearance." Derek stepped to the center of the restaurant, where every eye was now locked on him. "I visited this location on Monday, not as your CEO, but as a customer named Walt." He turned toward Cassie. Her eyes widened, stunned. "What I saw was disturbing enough to trigger a full corporate investigation." He opened his leather portfolio and pulled out a thick folder. "Doug Henderson and Ryan Henderson, step forward, please." The uncle and nephew exchanged looks, then reluctantly moved forward, like men walking to their own execution. "Over the past 6 months," Derek declared, each word landing like a hammer against stone, "the two of you have deliberately manipulated the POS system and loyalty card program to siphon tips away from your staff." He raised the documents in his hand. "You created fraudulent employee classifications to block hard-working people from receiving the compensation they earned. You intimidated staff, intercepted complaints meant for higher management, and silenced anyone who tried to speak up." Doug snapped, his voice cracking with anger. "These accusations are outrageous. You can't possibly..." $18,742.63. Derek cut him off coldly. "That's how much in tips you stole just in the past quarter. We have transaction logs, testimony from former employees, and surveillance footage." He gestured to Mara, who raised a tablet for all to see, displaying a spreadsheet filled with figures and payout trails. "Even the $50.00 tip from yesterday," Derek continued, "was processed by Ryan on a table served by Cassie." Ryan's face turned pale, his lips trembling. "You said no one would ever check." The accidental confession made Doug whip his head around. glaring at his nephew with barely contained fury. Flustered, he stammered, "There must be some misunderstanding. I can explain. It was part of our group incentive program." "Stealing isn't incentivizing," Derek said coldly. "It's a crime, and it has hurt the people who are the backbone of this company." He turned toward the staff, gathered in a stunned, silent semicircle. "Effective immediately, Doug and Ryan Henderson are terminated from Sunrise Restaurant Group. The company will be filing charges for fraud and misappropriation of funds." Two security officers stepped forward, closing in on the disgraced pair. Doug struggled, his voice turning desperate. "You can't do this. This is my restaurant. I built this from nothing." "No," Derek said, locking eyes with him. "You didn't build this. You inherited a successful location with loyal employees, and you exploited all of it. The people who truly built this restaurant are standing right here." He extended his arm toward Cassie. "The cooks, the servers, the ones who had been ignored for too long, and they deserve better than this." As Doug and Ryan were escorted out, Cassie stepped forward, her eyes brimming with tears, but her posture proud. "You were never really a truck driver, were you?" Derek looked at her, his stern expression softening. "No, Cassie. But everything I saw these past few days was real, including the theft of the tips you rightfully earned." For the first time in months, Cassie smiled, not the polite smile of a worn-out server, but a genuine one. One of pure relief. So what happens now? 1 month later, Derek Langston returned to Sunrise Diner, No. 28. This time, there was no disguise, no investigation team. Just him, a warm smile on his face, and pride in his eyes. The familiar bell above the door chimed as he stepped in, but the atmosphere inside was completely different. Morning sunlight streamed through freshly polished windows. Staff moved with ease, their smiles no longer forced. Near the entrance, a digital screen displayed the day's shift schedule, complete with employee photos and a transparent breakdown of tip distribution. "Good morning, Mr. Langston," came a familiar voice. Cassie, now in a crisp new uniform, with a gleaming shift manager Taylor nameplate at her collar, approached with a confidence Derek had never seen in her before. "Good morning, Manager Taylor," Derek replied, his smile wide and genuine. The dark circles that once shadowed her eyes were gone, replaced by a spark of determination that reminded him of himself 30 years ago. "Your usual table is ready," she said, pointing to the same booth where Walt had once sat. "If you don't mind, I'd love to join you for a few minutes." The morning rush hasn't quite started yet. They sat down, two people from different generations, both having fought their own battles, now united by a shared belief in fairness. Derek looked around, noting the subtle but significant changes everywhere. For the first time in years, he felt a deep warmth, a quiet fulfillment. The kind that comes when justice, even if delayed, finally arrives. Sunrise Diner, No. 28, now glowed not just with morning light, but with transparency and trust. Near the kitchen, a large screen showed a live schedule and tip distribution dashboard. Each employee now used a personalized login card at the updated POS system, ensuring that every transaction was recorded accurately and fairly. "How's the new tip system working out?" Derek asked as Cassie personally poured him a cup of coffee, a small tradition she maintained each time he visited. "It's changed everything," Cassie replied, her eyes gleaming with pride. "Now everyone can see every tip as it comes in and how it's split. The dashboard updates in real time. No more missing money, no more secrets." Derek nodded with quiet satisfaction. After firing Doug and Ryan, he had officially tasked Cassie with designing a new tip-sharing protocol, a transparent, standardized model to be rolled out across all 147 Sunrise locations. To him, no one was better suited to lead that change. "And your classes?" he asked, his voice warm, almost fatherly. "Final semester starts next week," Cassie said with excitement. The compensation package for my new role covers tuition, and the settlement from Doug and Ryan made up for everything they took. The lawsuit against the Hendersons had moved swiftly. Faced with criminal charges, they agreed to a full financial settlement for all affected employees, plus heavy civil penalties. The case had made headlines across the restaurant industry, a cautionary tale proving that justice still existed if someone dared to demand it. "How's the team adjusting?" Derek asked, nodding toward the kitchen, where new hires worked smoothly alongside seasoned staff. "Better than we could have hoped," Cassie replied. "Aside from those directly involved in the scheme, everyone stayed, and the new hires, they're amazing." She leaned in slightly, her voice softening. "That anonymous reporting system you introduced, it's a game changer. People finally feel safe speaking the truth." That system had been one of Derek's first moves after the scandal, a direct hotline to corporate compliance, bypassing local management to protect whistleblowers. And it had already proven its worth. "Regional oversight's better too," Derek added. "Stan stops by every week now, like clockwork," Cassie said with a laugh. "Though he still looks like he's walking into a courtroom every time." She laughed for real, a sound Derek hadn't heard from her before. Not forced, not polite, just honest and free. Stan hadn't been fired. He wasn't corrupt, just complacent, too willing to believe Doug's glossy reports. Derek chose a different path for him: education. A comprehensive retraining in employee rights, ethics, and fraud detection. 6 months of hands-on supervision. Customers began to trickle into the diner, the soft chime of the doorbell ringing with each entry. Cassie stood up, her eyes glowing with renewed confidence. "Will you be staying for breakfast?" she asked. "Just observing, I think," Derek replied. "I've still got a few more locations to visit. This is my third one this week." After the incident at Sunrise Diner No. 28, Derek had quietly launched audits at 10 randomly selected branches. 2 showed minor discrepancies, and 1 exposed another tip-skimming scheme, less sophisticated than Doug's, but unethical all the same. The message had spread. Accountability was no longer a slogan, it was action. Before leaving, Derek stopped by the kitchen. He shook hands with every team member, calling each by name, as if to remind them. "I see you. I remember you." In the small office, once the control room for Doug's manipulation, now stood Cassie's desk. Next to her computer was a neatly stacked pile of management handbooks and accounting textbooks, ready for when classes resumed. "We're on track to beat last quarter's numbers by 17%, Cassie said proudly as she walked him to the door. "Looks like when employees are happy, customers tend to be too. Who would have guessed?" "Some people doubted it," Derek said with a wink, "but a few of us always knew it was true." Outside he paused. Through the window he watched Cassie return to work. Her voice carried clearly, giving direction, firm but kind. She was no longer the overworked, exhausted server he had met weeks earlier. She was a leader now, composed, confident, and respected. On the wall behind her hung a new oak-framed sign with the company's revised mission statement, written collaboratively by both corporate leadership and frontline staff in the wake of the scandal. "Respect begins with honesty. Success will follow." As Derek pulled out of the parking lot, his phone buzzed. A message from Mara. "New report from Nebraska. Small location, different setup, same issue." Derek replied. "Send a team. I'll be there tomorrow morning." In the rearview mirror, Sunrise Diner No. 28 faded slowly into the distance. Still the same sign, same lot, same building. But inside, everything had changed. And all because one exhausted server had the courage to tell the truth to a man she believed was just another passerby. Then Derek reflected, the most important ingredients in a restaurant are never listed on the menu. Their trust, dignity, and the courage to stand up for what's right, even when you think no one's watching.